and streamed. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. This is the Board Governance and Personnel Committee, September 28th, 2021. It's about 1:18 p.m., so I will call this meeting to order. With that, I'll need a roll call.
Certainly. Chair Philman?
Present.
Treasurer Garrity or designee?
This is Lloyd Ebright sitting in for the Treasurer.
Thank you. Senator Hughes or designee?
Matt Lindsay on behalf of Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Secretary Thal?
Here.
And Secretary Vague or designee?
Hi, Katie. It's Alan. I'm here.
Thanks, Alan. Everyone's present.
Okay, we have an agenda or a quorum. The next piece of the agenda material is the approval of minutes, and the motion is in order to approve the minutes of the July 27, 2021 Board Governance and Personnel Committee meeting. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any questions on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor, aye? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Motion is carried. The first item of the agenda is old business, and I do want to announce that the 4C, which is the Executive Director Search update from Katie Matthews, will be moved to after the executive session when the public session resumes. So we will do A, B, and D at this point, and I will turn it over now to Chris Houston. Chris?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. Deputy Executive Director for Administration, Chris Houston here. I'm going to be reviewing with you, follow-up to our last meeting, reviewing the Funston recommendations from the Fiduciary Review and Board Self-Assessment. I turn your attention to Board Docs Item 4A. There are some documents in there which are background information. We have the complete status report in there. We have a memo from Joe Marcucci dealing with one of the recommendations dealing with Board Counsel. We also have a strategy document for the development of a board education plan. And then finally, we also have a position description, a revised position description for the chair and or committee chair and assistant chair. The status document that you have in your I'll call packet, I keep using that term from the old days, in Board Docs, provides also for information purposes those recommendations previously reviewed where no action was taken. Also provides information on those where alternative action was taken. Also provides just for information purposes those which have not been reviewed as of yet. So if you could turn to the next slide, please, Dan. What I'm going to first be covering is update on recommendations previously reviewed. Back in last meeting, the Board Governance and Personnel Committee recommended for approval to the Board, and the Board will be acting on tomorrow revised bylaws, which do provide for term limits as provided for in this recommendation. Specifically, the bylaws will provide for 2-year terms for committee members, 2-year terms for committee chairs and assistant chair positions, and term limits of 3 consecutive 2-year terms for committee officer positions, not commencing though until 2022. So next slide, please. And by the way, you can stop me at any time if you have any questions about anything. There's a lot of material here which I'm going to be running through. But again, feel free to ask any more detailed questions if you wish. So on the next recommendation we're going to be covering as a follow-up to an update really on one that was previously reviewed. This was a recommendation to record dissenting opinions and concerns on no votes, which identify the issues prompting those no votes. This recommendation has been implemented. We have board operating procedures, and they've been revised to specifically provide for roll call voting being applied to all board meetings for attendance and all motions except for the adoption of agendas, consent calendars, etc. Roll call voting is also being applied to all committee meetings for the basic regular motions that we do, except for election of the chair, minutes, and adjournment. And then also staff will take note of any dissenting opinions and concerns on no votes if stated only. So that recommendation has been implemented. Next slide, please. At the last meeting, the committee did review both recommendations 6.3 and 6.6. We discussed those, and the discussion led to us being asked to develop a resolution which would provide that for the committee to recommend to the board to provide for obtaining approval from the board chairperson and the selection of voting members of the evaluation committees for procurements under the RFP process of the Commonwealth Procurement Code. The motion that we're proposing distinguishes between those procurements which are not for the procurement of outside counsel and for those which are. For the motions that are for outside counsel, the proposed motion provides that the chief counsel and executive director would serve on those committees in recognition of the authority delegated previously by the board to the chief counsel with concurrence of the board secretary to retain, hire, and terminate outside counsel. So essentially, if the committee moves forward with acting on this recommendation, the chairman would be involved in selecting the evaluation committee members, except, as I said, for outside counsel procurements. So that's the motion that's in board docs for your consideration. Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to you if you want any further discussion on this one in particular, since we are asking for action on this.
Anybody have questions for Chris?
I see two hands up. Mr. Flanagan and Mr. Craig.
Hi, I'll go ahead and jump in first if that's okay, Mr. Chairman. So looking at this recommendation regarding the composition of RFP committees, in the case of outside counsel, there would certainly, be many cases where it would of course be prudent to include the chief counsel and board secretary. But there may also be cases that arise, periodically and special situations where, for whatever reason, it may be appropriate for the board to have a voting RFP committee that consists of board members exclusively. And so I'd had the opportunity to touch base with Chris Houston and Joe Marcucci on this prior to the meeting and really appreciate their thoughts and feedback on this, and would suggest for other trustees to consider making this motion such that the chair would always have the authority to appoint members of the committee, which could include the chief counsel and the executive director, but that in the case of outside counsel procurement, it not be the status quo or the baseline in terms of how the RFP committee is formed. So that way there is that discretion in the event that there's a situation that arises that chief counsel and the board secretary or the board may not want to be voted for the RFP. So I'll offer that for consideration. Thank you.
Still make your comment?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I got kicked off before, and I'm just re-entered. Christopher Cross, you have a question? Christopher Craig, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm not the musician. I'm much less. So I guess I have a little bit of concern about what's been suggested. I think, we just had the slide that indicated that for consultants that are to be independent and directly report to the board, it should be exclusively board members voting. It's not clear to me why that should differ for counsel if the circumstances are such that counsel is to exclusively represent or report to the board. I think it's one thing to have the chief counsel and the executive director and other staff on the committee to maybe advise the members, but they should not be voting members of the committee. Under circumstances in which legal counsel is retained to be an independent advisor or representative of the board.
Joe, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, let me get turned on here. The existing or the proposed resolution was an attempt to conform this recommendation with the prior resolution of the board establishing an independent legal office. And when the board established an independent legal office, the motion said that the chief counsel, with the concurrence of the executive director, is delegated the authority to take care of the internal personnel issues, and subject to the procurement code and other personnel rules, hire and fire outside counsel. So we thought we would be remiss to simply override that on our own volition and ignore that earlier board resolution. Certainly this board could at this point decide, now that we've got the chairman approving or appointing the committees, defer to the chairman on any given case, whether the chief counsel and the executive director should not be on the committee at all, or be on the committee as a non-voting person, or be on the committee with a vote. Again, nothing nefarious here. We were simply trying to be congruent with the earlier board resolution, which currently has delegated to the chief counsel and the executive director the authority to hire outside counsel. So that's why it's the way it is. We can live with it being changed along the lines of what Alan had suggested.
Though, I just want to be clear, I'm actually differing, if I understand what Alan suggested from him.
Oh, okay.
Joe, I think what you said makes perfect sense, and I don't know that this is terribly inconsistent. When they created independent counsel, the independent referenced independent from the Office of General Counsel of the Governor's Office, that now it serves as an entity, can select its own counsel as it deems appropriate. The subset, if you will, that I'm trying to describe is under those circumstances in which it is the selection of an independent counsel, or maybe there's a more artful way of phrasing it, a counsel that independently reports to the board, is just the board's attorney. I'm not advocating for it, but if in the future the board would decide they want a fiduciary counsel, or if the board would say, hey, we got a subpoena from somebody, we need counsel that's very experienced to just advise and counsel the board on its decisions and its oversight of the process, etc. Those would be circumstances in which the board may obtain and desire to obtain an independent legal counsel to report to them. And I think under those circumstances, it's appropriate for the chair to determine who's on the RFP committee. And again, I think it would be consistent and appropriate for the chief counsel to advise the board in the selection process. But I feel strongly that if it is circumstances in which it is independent counsel, then it should be exclusively board members on the scoring committee.
Yes, Christopher, that makes a lot of sense. Currently, as I was saying, currently the board resolution that was adopted in 2018 delegated to the chief counsel and with the concurrence of the executive director to hire outside counsel subject to the procurement code. We were simply trying to conform this motion to that. Sure. This board can change that decision and go to have more say and not have the chief counsel and the executive director on the hiring of outside counsel.
Joe, that seems absolutely reasonable. I get it. I'm, some may, say that I'm overly cynical, but these are very hard-learned lessons from our PSERS experience.
Yes.
And again, I am not suggesting that SERS is PSERS. In fact, we would be one of the very first offices to point out the night and day differences in how PSERS is an example of a well-run fund as compared to a dysfunctional one. But having said all of that, we've learned very much the hard way the danger that happens when management captures consultants or advisors that are to be independent consultants and advisors to the board. And that sense of capture can lead to very dangerous results. And I don't think I'm overstating that compared to the experience we've had with PCERS. And I stress, Joe, I hold you in really high regard.
Well, thank you.
My concern is not at all a reflection of your team or SERS. It really is a consequence of been there, done that, and it was unpleasant. And I think minimally the board should always be very jealous about protecting its independence and preserving its oversight function under any circumstance. And I think this is a modest change, but I think an important change of which I'm advocating.
And I think we have prepared a resolution that would accommodate both what you and Alan are suggesting.
Before we do
As
that,
an alternative resolution.
Right, I see Terry has her hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And that's exactly what I was going to say. It's very easy for us to modify the motion to reflect the board's wishes. And we have absolutely staff has no issues or concerns with it, and they can make a good argument. So we can manage that.
And Chris, is this the one we came up as the possible alternative? Is that spot on for everybody's concern?
Yes, that's the one we're talking about. Yeah.
Okay. We had, Chris and I had some conversation with this with some of the board members, and the original motion has been modified. Are there any other questions on what has been brought up so far before I read the motion? Okay, seeing none, a motion is in order that the Board Governance and Personnel Committee recommend to the State Employees Retirement Board that for procurements under the Request for Proposals, RFP process of the Commonwealth Procurement Code 62 PACS Sections 101, it direct the State Employees Retirement System issuing office to obtain approval from the board chairperson in the selection of the voting members of the evaluation committees. Do we hear a motion to that effect?
I'll make the motion, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Anyone on the question?
So this is Christopher again, Mr. Chairman. So the motion as you read it, does that then mean that the chair may only appoint board members to the scoring committee? Or
It could. It says selection of the voting members of the evaluation committee. So it would give the opportunity for the chairperson to use their decision-making process for anybody. It's not exclusively board, but the board chairman could do exclusively board.
is there concern or opposition to the notion of saying that for the selection of counsel that is to independently advise and report to the board, that those members, those persons selected shall be members of the board?
I'll let Chris and Joe mull that over.
Yeah, I mean, we could add at the end of that, except for procurements for outside counsel, that in those instances, they will be limited to board members.
And Chris, I wasn't trying to be over grabby. So, like, for example, if the board were to decide they want to hire somebody to represent the system in litigation, I'm not suggesting under that circumstance that it be exclusively board members on the scoring committee. I was thinking of just those circumstances in which the attorney or counsel was contemplated to exclusively represent, or maybe the right word is independently represent the board, or independently advise and counsel the board. Am I confusing things, or does that make things a little bit better?
Joe?
I personally think it's confusing, Christopher, because that's a judgment call. Let me suggest that to hire outside counsel, we have to go through the procurement code. So if we were to be issuing an RFP, it would be going to the chairman, and at that point, the chairman could be discussing it with this committee and the rest of the board. Oh, we're hiring outside tax counsel, or we're going to hire bankruptcy counsel to represent us in a bankruptcy case or something, and then the board can decide on a case-by-case basis whether that was an independent representation and advice to counsel. I mean, there are times we have brought tax counsel in to talk to the board on an issue, or an outside counsel. It's the discernment of what we would mean in the future, 5 years from now, 3 years from now, as to independence. If the board has a good feel for that, then I think the motion works. It's hard to say, though. And I'm just because I've seen how these things turn out in the future. We went with a motion that would be more flexible instead of locking in. I think the mechanics of the procurement process would give the board the opportunity to chime in at that time.
Alan Flanagan.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So the concerns Chris raised are precisely why I raised the concerns that I had as well. I mean, I think Chris and I are maybe going about trying to solve for the same issue in a slightly different way. Chris, please feel free to correct me if I mischaracterize anything incorrectly here, but it seems like you want to have a express prohibition on the inclusion of folks on those committees. That's really where I was kind of going to with the suggestions that I had made to change in terms of making sure that the composition of that outside counsel committee would be board members exclusively. And I think part of that is expressing that as a desire to the chairman, since the chairman would have that authority as well, which I think our chairman's always been willing to be open to suggestions and the views of the board. So thought that instead of tripping over what exactly do we carve out, that this change would be a little bit cleaner, and that the chairman would be able to reflect the wishes of the board for committee composition as he sees fit. Is that helpful?
Look, I think it's helpful. I mean, maybe so. Joe, does it make sense to say, under circumstances in which the board has determined a need for independent counsel, the chair shall select shall select exclusively members of the board for the voting committee? I know that's not the right phrase. So
yeah, I think that makes sense. Yes.
Well, it's been properly moved and seconded. We're having discussion. I'm seeing some concurrence as far as where both Alan and Christopher are. I'm assuming then that either, I guess, Chris is modifying the motion?
I think it would be like a friendly, would you consider like a friendly amendment to the motion? I believe that would be the protocol.
Well, go ahead.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that it would be a friendly amendment. I would accept it as friendly.
And as chairperson, I would recognize it as a friendly amendment. I guess we just need the language at this point.
Chris, can you, I think you had a job.
I think he's working on it, I think.
Except in instances of the procurement of independent board counsel, the evaluation committee shall be comprised exclusively of board members.
Chris, I would suggest, based on what Joe said, that you want the phrase, except under circumstance in which the board has determined a need for, and then the rest of what you've written down. So that way, it's not a guess on anybody's part. The board as a whole would have to determine that they have a need for an independent legal representation. And then upon that, that triggers then the the committee that's exclusively composed of board members. Am I capturing that correctly, Joe?
Yes, that was my understanding of what you were suggesting, and I think that would work.
No, me too.
Okay. Yeah, so except in instances where the board has determined the need to procure independent outside counsel, the evaluation committee shall be comprised exclusively of board members.
As selected by the chair.
Right.
I forgive me, but I think it may be a little backwards.
Terry, I was having the same confusion.
Yeah, you're kind of saying except when it's independent counsel, it's all board members. I think what you're saying, when it is determined by the board that you need independent counsel, then it is exclusively board members. Otherwise, the chairman has the flexibility. So I think you had the wording just a little bit backwards there. So can you start from the beginning and read the motion in full? I think that would be helpful.
A motion is in order that the Board Governance and Personnel Committee recommend to the State Employees Retirement Board that for procurements in the request for proposals process of the Commonwealth Procurement Code, 62 PACS Sections 101 et sec, it direct the State Employees Retirement System issuing office to obtain approval from the board chairperson in the selection of voting members of the evaluation committees, except for, I don't know if we say except for.
No, provided that, Chris.
Okay.
Provided that when the board has determined the need for independent counsel, and then run with it.
Okay, except or provided that when the board has determined the need for independent counsel, that the evaluation committee shall be comprised exclusively of board members.
That sounds, from my perspective, I think you captured it, but board members, please.
Sounds good to me. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions or comments on that amendment? If there are none, I'll consider the amendment a friendly amendment. We'll attach to it, and we will read the motion now as modified. And Chris, if you could do that, since you were taking the notes, and then we will seek a motion on the modified amendment.
A motion is in order that the Board Governance and Personnel Committee recommend to the State Employees Retirement Board that for procurements under the request for proposals process of the Commonwealth Procurement Code, 62 PACS Sections 101 et sec, it direct the State Employees Retirement System issuing office to obtain approval from the board chairperson in the selection of voting members of the evaluation committees, provided that when the board has determined the need to procure independent outside counsel, the evaluation committee shall be comprised exclusively of board members.
It's been read. Do I hear a motion to that effect?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Treasurer. Do I hear a second?
I'll
Do I hear a
second.
second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much. Anyone on the question? Anyone on the question? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Chair Philman,
Aye.
Treasurer Garrity,
Aye.
Mr. Lindsay for Senator Hughes,
Aye.
Secretary Saul,
Aye.
Mr. Flanagan for Secretary Vig.
Aye.
All yes.
Thank you very much. Chris, continue.
Okay, next slide, please. These are looking at together. These are recommendations 6.4 and 6.5. The committee had discussed these back in July, and we talked about having a revised position description for the committee chair and assistant chair, which is in your packet of materials and board docs, which, if recommended for adoption, would memorialize the process to follow the development of work plans, which would factor in SIR's strategic plan goals and board policy priorities, with the work plans being submitted to the board for approval. And
Okay.
there's a request for action on that.
Yeah, we do have a motion. Anyone on Chris's comments? Okay, with not, A motion is in order that the Board Governance and Personnel Committee recommend that the State Employees Retirement Board amend the Pennsylvania State Employees Retirement System Committee Chair and Assistant Chair position description as set forth in the attachment. Can I have a motion to that effect? I have a motion. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much. Roll call, please. Stop. Anyone on the question? Anyone on the question? All right, Katie, go ahead.
Chair Feldman?
Aye.
Treasurer Garrity?
Aye.
Mr. Lindsay for Senator Hughes?
Aye.
Secretary Saul?
Aye.
Mr. Flanagan for Secretary Vague?
Aye.
All yeses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris?
Okay, next slide, please. This is recommendation 1.4. This one provided that the board should consider hiring its own independent counsel in specific situations, including potentially expediting the board's role in handling disability reviews and appeals. Joe Marcucci has a memo to the committee in board docs. I'm going to turn it over to Joe to review this one with you, please.
Thank you, Chris. I will admit this recommendation from Funston was a little cryptic, and Funston did not give any explanation or indication as to exactly what the problem was or what they were trying to solve, other than the bare words of the recommendation. As far as the Chief Counsel's Office can discern, things are working and the board's needs are being satisfied. There are, however, perhaps 4 thrusts to this recommendation. The first might be that the board and Funston feels that they are not getting independent advice, square advice from the Chief Counsel's Office. I want to assure the board that all of the lawyers here consider the board to be the client. If there's any indication that board members feel that they are not the client here, that they are not getting the type of advice they want, please let me know so that we can take any actions and address any concerns that are there. Yes, we represent the staff because the staff's the administrative arm of the board, but the board and the system, the board corporately and the systems are who the client is. If the issue is you need more outside counsel, we do retain outside counsel now on a number of issues, and the board has talked about getting outside counsel on other issues. I do have the list. We have hired, in the last 20 years, we've probably had outside counsel 15, 20 times. If you think you need fiduciary counsel, if you think you need specialized litigation or bankruptcy or investment counsel, please let me know. Likewise, I will recommend outside counsel if there are issues where we think it's beyond the skill set of the in-house counsel. So we will be glad to get outside counsel if the board thinks it's needed on any given topic.
And if we could advance the slide to the next page, please.
Thank you. If the concern is that the appeals are lacking, and we're not quite certain why it would be just disability appeals, I will concede that with COVID-19, we did put hearings on a hiatus. We had trouble developing a remote hearing process that worked. We do have a remote hearing process that we are offering to claimants. We were also having staffing issues. We are fully staffed up. We have started rescheduling hearings. We have 11 hearings, either with a hard scheduled date in the next few months or a tentative date where we're awaiting confirmation from the opposing counsel that that date works. So we are processing hearings. The lawyers are not particularly involved in disabilities any more than we are in any other case. There's no particular reason why there should be any delay in those other than the fact that claimants often request the delays and continuances so they can get more medical information. And we discussed this issue at length in the memo, and I will be glad to talk about the appeal process further. I will point out that if things are optimal, all deadlines are met, and everybody does everything as fast as possible, the administrative hearing process the board has established under the general rules of administrative practice and procedure takes a minimum of 1 year to complete an administrative hearing from start to finish. Finally, there is an issue that we did consider, and perhaps this is it. There is a possibility that the chief counsel could be conflicted out of an administrative appeal or any other matter under the standard rules of conflicts that pertain to lawyers. We do not at this point have a well-developed set of alternative arrangements for that situation. We did while Chris was still in the office, but since he's left the legal office, we have to come up with a substitute for that. So we will work on developments of an alternative arrangement in case I or any future chief counsel is conflicted out of giving advice for some reason. Questions or comments on this topic? Because we would welcome the board's input, because I don't really know what the Funston was trying to get at.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Next slide, please. This recommendation 5.1 is, I'm not going to read every one, but you have a series of bullet points here. Really, the gist of this is to streamline performance reporting to the board. Next slide, please. So staff supports this recommendation. Performance reporting would continue to go through the committees. However, what we would like to do is to pay close attention to highlighting key performance, risk metrics, exceptions, and other board or other significant items in the resulting committee reports for the board's consideration. And we're hoping that over time, staff will work with the committees and the board to determine those key metrics and acceptable tolerances. Next slide, please. One of the things that we thought about in looking at this was whether there might be any need to have more time between some of the committee meetings and the board meeting. As you know, we're always kind of crammed. You know, we have the committee meetings that follow immediately to the board meetings. We're developing reports to the board. So one of the things was to look at, and what we're thinking of doing here is including in a survey, which we're going to be doing in any event and developing a board education plan, was to get input from the board as to whether there was any interest in holding, in particular, the investment committee and finance and member and participant services committees meetings on a day other than the day right before the board meeting. So again, we support this recommendation to work on streamlining their performance reporting, but those are our thoughts as far as whether any time constraints are limiting our ability to really turn things around in the way that we really want to focus on those real performance metrics. Anyway, so any comments on that? But that's our thoughts at this point. We would be surveying the board. Okay, next slide, please. So 6.1 is a very topic that I just mentioned about the recommendation that specifically they had was consider holding some committee meetings on days other than before the board meeting. So we've already basically covered that by saying, again, we're going to be looking for board input on what their thoughts are relative to that. Any questions on that? Next slide, please. So on 6.2, again, this is dealing with reporting out to the board on, particularly this one, focusing on investment performance and risk and actuarial risks. The board is going to be asked tomorrow to vote on amendments to the committee charters. In the investment committee charter, we specifically added in their language about investment performance and strategies and risks of the plans, that these are metrics that we're asking that the investment committee focus on and report out to the board. And similarly for the finance and member participant services committee charter, we're amending that charter to specifically include the annual stress testing and risk report. So we're looking to address this recommendation by highlighting those specific metrics that we wish for those two committees in particular to report out to the next board. Next slide, please. And again, as noted in the recommendation we just talked about, the same concept of, if we have a little more time in developing reporting out from the board, to focus on those key issues of investment performance and risk and other significant items, that would be part of the survey we're asking for, whether it makes sense to look at potentially having some of those committee meetings on the day other than right before the board meeting. And over time, staff will work with the committees and the board to determine what those key metrics and acceptable tolerances are, which would help ensure that items of interest are reported out to the full board. And we recognize everyone's busy and they can't go to all the committee meetings, and we want to make sure that we're reporting out to the board all those key factors that we need to have the board take into consideration. Any comments or questions on that one? Next slide, please. So 6.8, again, is kind of, having the committee sort of focus in on these what we call critical success drivers and do a deeper analysis on performance and alternative strategies and policy implications. And again, what we're saying here is that staff will focus on having committees do a deeper analysis on those performance and the drivers behind the performance, and report out to the board on those matters. Any questions on that one? Okay. Next slide, please. So I'll take these as a tranche. 7.1 through 7.3 all deals with developing a continuing education plan. And specifically, if you go to the next slide, please. In board docs, you'll find that there's a memorandum that provides, in furtherance of these recommendations and pursuant to the board education policy, a draft strategy document for the development of an education plan. And our goal here is to do a comprehensive survey to the board here in the next couple of weeks, which dives in on a lot of these particular issues of what you're looking for in the way of board education. So the strategy and timeline here is to survey the board, to develop an education plan, to bring that education plan back to this committee in December, and then potentially have the board act on that plan at the December meeting with an implementation of the plan for next calendar year. And then there would be a biennial review of that plan. It looks like, Treasurer, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. So I know we have a special presentation later in the meeting, but I thought maybe I would make my comment right here that I'm concerned. Seems like there would be an inherent conflict in a consultant finding a need for a particular service, like an education, that they provide themselves, if you know what I'm saying, Chris.
Right. Yeah, this was a concept of a type of a program that you could be looking at. We knew that they had one. It's a unique feature, and they can speak more to their particular product. But yeah.
I know what I'm trying to say is, since they made the recommendation in their report, I think it's kind of a conflict that that we would look to them to provide what they recommended. And I know I haven't spent a lot of time with Dr. Bell, but I'm told by my staff that he really does an exceptional job on the board training program.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Appreciate the comment. Thank you. Does anybody else have a comment?
Yeah, Chris, just if I may, I believe I did ask you to look into that matter, and you spoke to, I believe, Mr. McCormick about it, correct?
Yes.
Make sure there was no conflict. Treasurer, very good point, and I did ask Chris to check with counsel to make sure there was no sort of conflict, and you just might want to confirm that. Chris?
Well, we look to the unique nature of the product, and again, they're going to speak to what they're offering. And again, the board education plan is separate from the potential training that they offer. This is an actual plan document that we'd be looking at. It's not tied in to any particular vendor or anything like that.
Okay, so the special presentation by Funston isn't for them to sell their own product?
It's for them to sell a product, but this board education plan is not their product, is what I was saying.
Okay, all right. Okay, I understand.
In other words, we will be developing a plan, and all that they have is a tool of training materials if the board would even want us to pursue that.
Okay.
Okay.
And if I may add one more observation, I believe, Chris, and please correct if I'm wrong, these recommendations, and this point actually caused us a little confusion ourselves, but this section, I believe, are recommendations that came from board members themselves. The recommendations about needing an education plan and so on. Correct, Chris? Maybe you want to clarify that a little bit.
This component came out of the self-assessment.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So as opposed to some of the other recommendations,
the board members were looking for more in the way of education and more in the way of, providing something tailored to them, if you will, among other things. So there's comments, which I believe we have in the materials, that this recommendation came from, comments from board members.
as opposed, Treasurer, to other recommendations that Funston had made, and that sometimes confused us. As it's like these actually were almost pass-throughs from particular board members or designees.
Okay, that helps clarify it. I have maybe a slightly different view about Funston now that I've worked with them on the other pension board, so that's some of the reason for my comment. Thank you so much, Gary.
You're welcome.
Any other comments on the strategy that we have here? Okay. Next slide, please. So this recommendation speaks to developing board succession planning for direct reports. So the direct reports are the executive director, then we have the chief investment officer. When we say direct reports, it's direct reports to the board. Now, the chief investment officer reports administratively to the executive director, but as a report to the board. Chief counsel reports administratively to the executive director, but as a report to the board. Then we have the internal audit director, who reports administratively to the executive director, but is also a report to the board. And then we have the chief compliance officer, who reports administratively to the chief counsel at present, because the position's in the chief counsel's office, but it's a direct report to the board. And there was a role spelled out in the charter for the committee to collaborate with staff in overseeing leadership succession planning. Next slide, please. And what we were thinking was having us develop a succession plan strategy for each of those direct reports, which would include, developing next level of staff as potential good internal candidates, having direct reports identify key outside contacts to assist successors, ensuring lower level staff are in place to maintain direct reports functions upon departure of the direct report, and developing a deeper bench to backfill positions being promoted, and embracing in all of this the strategic plan guiding principles of developing and empowering employees. And so these are just some of the ideas that we had, and again, this was, to Terry's point earlier, this recommendation was from something that came out of the board self-assessment. So if there's any other input that or any other ideas that you would want us to consider, otherwise the idea would be to go ahead and develop some succession plan strategies for these positions. Okay. Next slide, please. So 9.1 and 9.2 again kind of relates back to the direct reports. 9.1 was to establish a more collaborative process in setting goals, including consideration of annual goals linked to the strategic plan, and link compensation to the achievement of goals to the extent permitted by the state. And then 9.2 is provide more informal feedback on an ongoing basis. In your materials, I'm not going to read through it all here, but in your materials, we've outlined what the current process is for each of these positions. There's specifically the performance review process for both the executive director and CIO. For the internal audit director and the chief compliance officer positions, the Audit Risk and Compliance Committee charter provides that the committee, with input from the executive director, evaluates these positions and reports those evaluations to the board. From a compensation standpoint, the internal audit director in particular is the compensation is under the Commonwealth's compensation plan, or metrics, if you will. But for performance feedback, the practice has been for the SERS HR to seek performance feedback on that position, and the same goes for the Chief Compliance Officer position. With the position having been filled by an attorney, the practice has been that SERS HR seeks performance feedback from the full board to be provided to the executive director, who incorporates it into the annual performance review of the Chief Compliance Officer. Currently, since it's an attorney, the Chief Counsel has completed a separate employee performance review for the attorney's position in the Chief Counsel office. For the Chief Counsel, there is no process that provides, I'm sorry, we could go on to the next slide here. There is no current process that provides for any performance goals. What I'd like to do here is suggest that at this point, staff is not recommending any revisions to the performance review and goal-setting processes that exist for the executive director and chief investment officer position. And staff is suggesting deferring any further action regarding the way the CIO's compensation is established until the classification and compensation study is completed, which Katie's going to give you a brief update on here in a minute. For the internal audit director and chief compliance officer position, we are looking at, our recommendation would be to look at amending the audit risk and compliance committee charter to provide that if the chief compliance officer position is filled by a lawyer and is administratively housed in the chief counsel's office, that the chief counsel would seek input from the committee and that, as I said, he does, or he or she does, an employee performance review process for that position. And then we're suggesting, though, deferring any further action regarding the way the chief compliance officer's compensation is established until the classification and compensation study is completed, because that position is included in that study. And then finally, for the chief counsel position, if you can move the slide up just a little bit, staff recommends amending the Board Governance and Personnel Committee charter to provide that the executive director will seek input from the board in the employee performance review process of the chief counsel. And again, staff suggests deferring any discussion of action regarding the way that compensation is arrived at until that classification and compensation study is completed. Any questions on any of those? Okay. Next slide, please. Next slide.
There you go.
10.1. So this is a recommendation to meet annually with the external consultants and advisors in executive session without staff present to obtain more independent opinions from advisors. And we're basically advising that, it certainly makes sense that the board would want to have assurance that their consultants and advisors are in fact operating independently from staff and are not unduly influenced by staff. But unfortunately, there are some challenges in doing that in executive session because of the Sunshine Act and the limitations that we have on the matters that can be discussed in executive session. Executive sessions can be held for limited purposes, which are outlined there on the slide. Next slide, please. Recognizing, though, that there are these constraints, there could be circumstances that external consultants could certainly be met with in executive session. Staff can certainly be excused. However, it's going to really be kind of very fact-dependent upon what it is you wish to discuss with your independent advisors and consultants. Having said all that, regardless, board should be given an opportunity to set expectations and confirm the relationship between its consultants and staff, and the relationship between consultants and the board. That these are your consultants, you have expectations that they are working for you, and those expectations should be clearly delineated to the consultants. Any questions or comments here?
Just a comment, Chris. We have done this in the years past. We've brought in the consultants individually and asked them questions. But more importantly is how are their recommendations going, are they passing through the staff or the staff stopping them? Now maybe we stretched the Sunshine Act a little bit when we were having these previous discussions. But we have done this, and I think it's some of the board members previously had thought that maybe the staff was squashing some of the recommendations of the consultants, or they weren't getting directly to the board. For the ones before, the consultants assured us no, their comments and or direction was accepted by the staff, and it wasn't squashed at all before the board. So this is a good thing for us to have, just the board with the consultants. But again, with the parameters and the legalities of what we have to deal with, we'll deal with that when we get there. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Dave. It looks like Jim Bloom, you have a question? Jim?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of back up what Dave said. Most of the time when you have an executive session with your consultant, one could probably characterize that as a personnel matter, because you are sort of asking, how are we doing? Is there any, are we having any problems getting past the staff to us? What would your recommendation be for a certain set of circumstances? So I don't see really a major sunshine problem with those kinds of meetings, but I'm not the attorney. Thank you. And Dave, thank you for letting me speak during your committee. I'm not on it.
Looks like someone else has their hands up. Terry.
I just want to kind of echo Jim's comments. Of course, we have to look at each individual situation, but I believe that in many cases it could be couched as a personnel issue. So I just wanted to support those comments.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, next slide, please. So this 10.2, the recommendation was review the performance of all outside advisors on a regular schedule, in other words, annually, and discuss board expectations for the upcoming year. Now, for those committees that have oversight responsibilities for outside advisors, and I'll speak to them, like we have the investment committee with the investment consultants. We have, finance member and participant services committee for the actuary. And then we have the audit risk and compliance committee for the independent auditor. What we're suggesting is that staff will be working with the committee chairs to work into the work plans and annual performance, we'll call it a performance review, as referenced in this recommendation. So that's our suggestion as to how we can look at working this in. If you had any other thoughts about that, I'd like to hear them. Okay. Next slide, please. 10.3, this was have external advisors provide more information to the board on several topics. One being the actuary should spend more time advising the board, not just the Finance and Member Services Committee, on various actuarial and investment risks, and explain how they arrive at their recommendations, and have the specialty investment advisors provide general information in their investment area. Our next slide here. Our thinking here is that staff would work with the chair of the Finance and Member and Participant Services Committee and the board chair in ensuring that the actuary appears before the board at least annually. Some issues, there might be a need for both, in front of the committee and in front of the board with the actuary on matters. And for the topics where the actuary would appear at both meetings on the same topic, again, the concept of having committee meetings at times other than the day before the board will give staff and the committee chair time to focus on highlighting those issues, which the board should be made aware of and focus on if there is a follow-up presentation to the board. And then, next slide, and then again, this sort of goes back into that concept of seeing what the board wants to do, of whether you want to have some of those committee meetings on days other than the day before the board meeting. And we'll also include in that survey requests for topics on which the board would like to have all the consultants, if any, focus on in any presentations to the board. So the idea would be to flesh that out through the survey process. And then also noted in the other recommendations and our comments on those, the committee reports will look to highlight key performance indicators and other metrics. That's all I have on those items.
We have a question?
Yes. This is Mary.
Hi, Mary.
I'm not on the committee, but what you've just been talking about, trying to think through when is the best time to have different committee meetings and so forth. When we were setting up the meeting for this morning for the Finance and Member Services, where we were specifically bringing in our outside actuary to do a presentation that I thought was very important for the whole board to hear, and that maybe that presentation should have been made tomorrow rather than at the committee meeting. Would this allow us to do something like that, where we could just have the presentation made before the whole board, just to make certain everybody sees it?
Right, yeah, unless there's some recommendation that's needed out of the committee, I guess that would be the only issue there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So that might be one of those where, it's in both places.
Yeah. Well, the thing is to have them come in and do the presentation and then do the exact presentation.
Right.
Probably to the same group, but maybe not. I think our members have gotten better at showing up at committee meetings when there's a significant presentation, but I did have concerns about that a year or two ago. Okay. That's all.
And Terry?
The gist behind a lot of this that I kind of got was that the committees are doing an outstanding job doing the deep dives into the issues. But when it comes time to report out to the board, it's kind of like we met, we had this presentation and a few things, and then motions. Where the thinking here that I'm seeing from these, again, from the board self-assessment, is that there should be more substance in the reports out to the full board, either in the committee reports or by consultants themselves. And so, again, by perhaps, and it seems to be mostly on the Investment and Finance Committee, so maybe by having them, other than the day before, the committees can meet and see these presentations or have discussions, and then provide some insight onto those things that they would like to see highlighted for the board meeting later. And then having time in between also provides time for those kind of adjustments or fine-tuning to be made, so that then the presentations aren't necessarily exactly the same, Mary, but it gives the committee more time to work with more preliminary or draft versions, so that they are in fact going to meet the needs of the full board. Something along those lines. That was kind of the gist that I was getting out of all this.
Okay.
I think that's exactly right, Terry. You hit the nail on the head there. So, Dave, that concludes the items under 4A.
4A, and let me tell you, this whole concept has been years in the workings for our governance policies. Now with the feedback that you have given through Funston and individually, so we're constantly looking at ways of improving this operation, and I appreciate everybody's comments as we go forward, and it only makes it for a better organization than before. So with that, go ahead, Chris.
I just one more thing. Thanks a lot, Dave. The other thing I just wanted to add, there are a couple more that we had designated that this committee would be looking at, which we'll be bringing to the committee. Not a lot, but a couple more to take before the committee in December as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. The next piece is 4B, which is the SIRS Strategic Business Plan, and Chris is up again.
Yes, this is just, I'm not going to spend time unless you had any questions. I know we want to make sure we stick to our time frame here, but In our work plan, we indicated that we would provide an update on the strategic business plan at every one of your committee meetings. So you'll find in board docs under 4B the latest update on the current fiscal year strategic business plan. Entertain any questions if anybody had any particular questions.
Any questions? Okay. Seeing none, we have moved the executive director search to a little later. With that, 4D, classification and compensation study, Katie Matthews.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm Katie. I'm the HR director for the agency, and I'll be going through a brief update on the status of a classification and compensation study. If you're following along in board docs, we are at agenda item 4D. Our current compensation policy for investment professionals, which is publicly posted on the CSRS website, provides for a comprehensive study every 3 to 5 years by an external and qualified consultant. Based on HR records, it appears that we initially engaged McLagan in 2013, but did not adopt a policy at that time. CSRS then engaged CBIZ in 2016 and adopted our current compensation policy in January 2017. Regarding our attorney positions, the agency became an independent legal office in late 2018, so no longer under the Office of General Counsel. We have been using the job titles and compensation structure available through the Commonwealth Classification Plan. So this will be the first comprehensive review of our attorney positions. At the September 30th, 2020 meeting of the board, it was resolved that the board accepted the recommendation of this committee to authorize the procurement of a consultant to conduct a comprehensive compensation and classification study of the CSRS investment professional positions and attorney positions, including the chief compliance officer position. So the request for proposal was posted May 19th through June 28th of 2021. We sought offerers to submit proposals for a scope of work which included educating the board and management on compensation practices and considerations, working with CSRS to understand and address compensation and classification concerns, conducting comparative market analysis and salary surveys, conducting job analysis and evaluations, recommending pay adjustments for existing staff, and developing compensation structures, classification structures, policies, job specifications, and position descriptions. We did receive a few proposals. Those were reviewed by the evaluation committee. The voting members on the evaluation committee were Mr. Jordan and Mr. Bloom for Secretary Vague, Christopher Houston as our admin deputy, and myself. We also had non-voting members in Joe Marcucci, Chief Counsel, Jim Nolan, our Chief Investment Officer, and Sarah McSturdy, the Chief Financial Officer. The contract for the classification and compensation study has been awarded to CBIZ, and I'm pleased to report that CSRS and CBIZ have finalized the terms of the agreement. The agreement does still need to go through the Comptroller and Office of Attorney General for approval. We anticipate that those approvals will be granted by the end of October, and we're hopeful that we will be able to actively begin this project shortly thereafter. Are there any questions?
Okay. Thank you, Katie. With that, we have a special presentation. We discussed it just a little bit ago, the Board Smart Governance e-Learning Resource Presentation by Funston Advisory Services. We have Randy Miller and Rachel Tillman. Chris, do you have to tee this out at all?
I'll tee it up. This is a product called BoardSmart, and I know Randy had spoken to the chairman about, or I don't know if it was Randy or perhaps Mr. Funston, Rick had spoken to the chairman about this. Just something we would just wanted to have a presentation to you to have you make you aware of these types of resources that are out there that we could procure if you wanted us to. So I'll just turn it over to Randy and Rachel to give their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And it's good to be back with you all. I'm Randy Miller. Rachel Tillman is also with us. She's the Chief Content Officer for BoardSmart. Just to take a second to talk a little bit about the background of what this is and why. In the more than a decade that Funston Advisory Services has been working with public retirement systems, kind of a universal issue that we've continued to see has been the need for better options for trustee training. And so 4 or 5 years ago, we published a book. We had our various experts help us, and we published a book called One of a Kind, a practical guide for 21st century public pension trustees. And it was meant to be a handbook for trustees, the things that are difficult to find good reference information about around particularly governance-related topics. And we realized while there was a lot of good content, it wasn't necessarily the best way to deliver that kind of information, and it wasn't getting as broad of adoption as we had hoped. So a couple of years ago, we formed an affiliate company called BoardSmart, of which I'm the Chief Operating Officer as well. And the intent was to create an e-learning platform for trustees, specifically designed for public retirement systems trustees. And we know that there is a lot of information and conferences and so forth out there, but we wanted this to really be targeted toward trustees in particular. So could I, next slide, please? So the way that we looked at it is the need is good governance requires that the board is knowledgeable. The reality is most trustees that come into a public retirement system board really don't have much of a background in the intricacies of a public retirement system. There's often, in addition, a lot of turnover. It takes time for all of the new trustees to get up to speed. I think typically what we hear trustees tell us is it's a couple of years before they really are fully up to speed in all of the areas. There are a lot of complex issues, and they can change pretty rapidly. And when you get down to what do we see most boards doing for trustee education, if they have a program, most of them are oriented around going to conferences. Of course, in the last couple of years with COVID, that's changed to be more webcasts and so forth to a great extent. The preponderance of them tend to focus on investments, though, rather than governance. And they don't really focus on, if you're starting from the premise of I want to be a good fiduciary, what are the things that I need to know about? So those are some of the things that we had in mind when we developed this. If we could go to the next slide, we want to then queue up about a 5-minute video from Rick, who is the CEO of BoardSmart. And could you, Daniel, please click on the link, and hopefully this technology will work. We think this is a good, quick overview. Daniel, you're muted. Maybe.
We've developed the only public pension trustees.
Well, it appears that the audio is not working. I had a little concern that this might be a technical challenge. Let's just go on to the next slide, if we can go back to that presentation. So the BoardSmart is a subscriber service for retirement systems. A system becomes a subscriber and gets buys a certain, pays for a certain number of seats, licenses for their trustees, and typically a number of the senior executive staff also have licenses. And it's built around a series of talks. We're currently, I think now this might even be a little bit out of date. I think we've just gone over 40 different talks, and we continue to introduce new ones, organized into a number of different areas. And you can see we call some the overview series, where it's kind of a background on the basics of defined benefit plans. Then some governance, the ones that are particularly focused on governance, starting with fiduciary duties, and various board matters. We also have some on asset management, but they're not the typical kind of investment training and education that you would come across. They're more from the trustee's perspective, things like in setting investment beliefs, setting the course and the asset allocation and overseeing that, looking at investment risks and actuarial basics and so on and so forth. Some of the basics of private equity, focusing on the fee structures and so forth as well. And then another part on decision and risk intelligence, which addresses strategy and performance and risk and so forth. And as you can see, a number of different areas, and this is expanding. We still have more to do in the operational area of pension administration and enterprise administration. We have asked our subscribers for what their priorities are, and what we've heard, for example, in the enterprise administration, cyber is clearly an area of, there's not a lot there necessarily that's focused on retirement systems, and it's on everyone's agenda, so we made sure we developed that. So this continues to expand, but these are typically about 20 minutes of a podcast type. So there's it's like a webcast with slides and a voiceover that's animated, and they're available. You can kind of access any of them you want at any time. There's not a sequence that you go in, so you can access them when you want in any order and so forth. And that's really the kind of the foundation for BoardSmart. But if we could go to the next slide. So there are some additional features, such as peer benchmarking through our InGov process. All of our subscriber systems complete our InGov profile questionnaire, and we're able to provide peer benchmarks around various governance and operational areas. We also have a policy repository, so we can help you quickly get input on specific policy areas where we can search through the policies from over 80 other public systems in the U.S. We can provide a place to put, in addition to having the talks available to your trustees, we can provide places to put your specific legislation, your policies, your onboarding materials, whatever else they might be. We can also put links to other external materials. There's an administrator to the system that is assigned who can run reports and kind of keep track of the usage and provide usage reports in terms of tracking continuing education, but also to be kind of the interface with us in case there are any questions or issues. We provide custom orientations and onboarding for when a system signs up with as many trustees and executives as you would like. And then as new trustees come on board, we will onboard them as well as requested. And then we also offer, as part of this, once a year, for if you have topics that you would like to tap into the faculty. I should have mentioned that there's a faculty of experts in all of the different areas that are part of this. That was in the video that we weren't able to show you, but there is a website called boardsmart.com where all of this is available, as well as the curriculum and so forth. But once a year, if you have as a subscribing system, if you have a topic, we will be happy to have a session with you as a board or a committee to discuss that with the appropriate experts from our faculty as well. And Rachel, is there anything important that I left out of that?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it.
Okay, so with that, I guess we really want to just be able to answer any questions you might have as well. I apologize for the video not working properly.
Thank you, Randy. Rachel, anybody have any questions? Any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity to present this to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, our item number 6 on our agenda, and we're even early right now, the amendment of fiduciary review policy. Chris Houston again.
Yes, so in board docs under agenda item 6A, there's a memo from me which basically gives the background that the board had directed the committee to take a look at amending the fiduciary review policy. The fiduciary review policy to provide for the elimination of the reference to economic factors as outlined in the memo, and we have the draft of the revised policy in the materials for your review and consideration. So what we're really looking for is an action item here to recommend to the board to proceed and adopt the amendment to the policy.
And Chris, that had to do with the term non-economic?
Yeah, non-economic under Exhibit A in the documents to eliminate the term non-economic investment requirements. It just says investment requirements pertaining to in-state managers, minority and women-owned businesses. And this was follow up to the board motion. Yes.
Right. We had discussion last time with this.
Right.
So with that, we do need a motion. A motion is in order that the Board Governance and Personnel Committee recommend that the State Employees Retirement Board amend the fiduciary review policy as set forth in the attachment. Can I hear a motion to that effect? Do I hear a motion?
So move.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Treasurer. Been properly moved and seconded. Anyone on the question? Anyone on the question? Roll call, please.
Chair Philman?
Aye.
Treasurer Garrity?
Aye.
Mr. Lindsay for Senator Hughes?
Aye.
Secretary Thal?
Aye.
And Mr. Flanagan for Secretary Vague.
Aye.
Thank you. All yes.
Thank you very much. With that, we will now go into executive session. I think someone's going to tee this up for us, and then we'll wait for our removal from the public session. Is Joe doing this?
Yes,
Go ahead, Joe.
yes, Mr. Chairman. The Sunshine Act allows an executive session to discuss any matter involving the employment, appointment, terms and conditions of employment, evaluation of performance, promotion, or disciplining of any specific prospective, current, or former employee of SCRS. The agenda item listed is investment professional pay adjustments in the investment office, which falls within that category. There's also been a late-breaking development in the search for the executive director, which, Katie, we're also going to talk about in executive session, I believe.
That's correct.
Yes, and that also falls within the category that's permitted.
Okay, so Don, can you shut us up?
Yep. Before we enter into the executive session, please give us some minutes to make a few technical changes here in the boardroom on your behalf. We'll make you aware when the appropriate changes have been successfully made. As a reminder, the public meeting will resume on this live stream connection when the executive session is complete. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and is now being live streamed. Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The only piece we have before adjournment is a report on the executive director search, and Katie Matthews, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. So again, I'm back, Katie, HR Director. If you're following along in board docs, we have backtracked and we're currently at agenda item 4C. So the executive director opportunity was posted August 4th through September 3rd, so about a month. I would say that we advertised fairly broadly through a combination of general, diversity, and industry-specific outlets. That being said, we have decided to reopen the posting for a period of time. We're going to start with 30 days with the option to potentially extend that depending on how things go. In Commonwealth recruitment, we do not leave postings open indefinitely, but in private sector, that's common to see postings which indicate applications will continue to be accepted until a position is filled. While keeping an opportunity open indefinitely would present some logistical issues for us, having this second application window will help ensure we have allowed ample opportunity for interested individuals to apply. The decision to accept additional applications is in no way a reflection of the current candidate pool. We do already have a number of qualified applicants with relevant experience, and we intend to proceed consistent with our originally outlined plans and timeframes. We'll just pivot and adapt along the way should the second application window garner additional viable candidates. So the next steps in the selection process are for the Board Governance and Personnel Committee to meet. The committee will be reviewing the current candidate pool, making selections for interview, and finalizing the interview questions and interview schedule. This will be accomplished through an executive session of the committee to be held next week on Wednesday, October 6th, starting at 12:30. So that's kind of my status update on that. I'll hand it off to our Chief Counsel briefly to make the standard statement about the executive session content in regards to the upcoming October 6th committee meeting.
Thank you, Katie. The Sunshine Act allows an executive session to discuss any matter involving the employment, appointment, terms and conditions of employment, evaluation of performance, promotion or disciplining of any specific prospective, current or former employee of SCRS. The executive session that Katie described at the time and location she mentioned falls within this category. We will be discussing the candidates for the executive director's position. That executive session will be a standalone executive session. There will not be a public meeting wrapped around it. We will not be going into public session and then moving into executive session. Therefore, I am making the announcement required by the Sunshine Act at this meeting to apply to this forward meeting we will be having on October 6th. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Does anybody have questions for Katie from her presentation? Okay, seeing none. Any comments, concerns, or questions? The last piece of the agenda. Seeing none, our next meeting will be December 7th or 8th of 2021. Motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Anyone on the question? All in favor, aye? Aye. All opposed, no. Motion is carried. And next up is the Audit and Risk and Compliance Committee meeting. At some point in time, Terry, do you want to announce that?
Yes, it was Sunshine for 3:05. So I assume you want to go directly to that, or the chair of that committee, who is Secretary Thal. Did you want to go right to it? Did you want a short break?
Yeah, let's give everyone a couple minutes. Let's try to start at 3:40, 3:45, somewhere in there.
Okay, I will let staff know, and then we can all just jump on that invite to be ready to go at 3:45. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
That's not good.